outside, damn it. I'm a legal historian, and I've been practicing personal injury law for most of my tour as a Marine. I'm sorry, strike that. I'm getting things confused with the parade going on today. I'm all excited. I get to see all my brothers in arms having a good time out there. No, so for the last 20 years now, I've been a lawyer, and I'm licensed to practice law in California and Texas. And this particular day is a special day to me because we finally have troops being celebrated, people who joined the military because they believed that they were serving the Republic and fighting for their fellow Americans, which is the reason I joined the Corps. And I consider the Marine Corps to be sort of my birth into manhood. And in most cultures, we know that you couldn't even become a man until you first became a warrior. And now we have the soft woke culture of brain dead idiots who believe anything Gavin Newsom or their communist mayor Bass tell them, of course, which is exact opposite of how I was raised. And it was always based on warrior culture. And we wouldn't even put someone in a position of leadership unless they were true warriors, right? I mean, think about our past leaders. Most of them had to be a general or have fought against the British, for example, before we would even consider them to put them in a leadership position. So today's a really cool day. Hopefully you're going to watch the parade. I'm going to try to cover it later. And I wanted to go down and discuss the history with you of our republic and the way our military works and why the U.S. Army has to be basically refunded every 2 years, and the historical context behind that, and also to motivate people who are older, who are struggling, trying to stay in shape. So let me give you a little bit of background. So I was doing these lawyer workout videos for quite some time, but then I got this really bad case of sciatica, put on about an extra 10 pounds of body fat. It's pretty terrible because, as you guys know, at least Marines from my generation think that you're a disgusting fat body if you're carrying body fat, right? You want to stay lean and mean. You want to be able to carry as much weight as you can. You want to be able to run and want to do a fast 3-mile run. You want to be able to do your PT and be squared away at all times. So getting older and being a disabled veteran, my back and my knees are all jacked up, and just was not able to do these lawyer workouts. But I did find that when I was doing them, I motivated a lot of you guys, especially you older codgers who kind of gave up on yourselves, to get your butts into the gym or get to the park and work out. So that's good stuff. And so today is an important day, but it's not the most important day. And by the way, I can't really see my phone because the sun is so powerful out here. It's just kicking my butt. But today marks the birth of the United States Army. And there's a huge parade going on in DC. We finally have a president who's honoring our military in the way that it should be honored. And we're going to have some old school parades like we used to have. And one of the things that I appreciate about the current administration is that it's done everything it can to keep us out of war. And you know, most of my buddies who were in forced reconnaissance units and Anglico, they're all screwed up. And I'm also a supporter of the Leathernecks Motorcycle Club. And, you know, a lot of these guys are suffering from PTSD. They have a lot of issues. And most of them are combat vets. I never served in combat, and that's another thing that separates the Marine Corps from the other branches, is if our mentality is we're a combat-oriented unit, So if you never served in combat, you're almost like considered to be a second-tier Marine. And I know officers and the higher up NCOs say that's not true, but it is. If you don't have a combat action ribbon, you're kind of like not looked down upon, but just not really considered to have been put through the final test of becoming a Marine. It's sort of like akin to taking judo, but never even entering a tournament to test your mettle. And that's another thing that I really liked about being in the Marines, is that they really look up to the guys who are in combat. My buddy John, who was also in 0311, he served, I think, a couple tours in Iraq, got blown up, I think a Humvee. He's one of these guys who, he got in a lot of trouble because, he's a troublemaker like a lot of guys in the infantry are. And he should have been a corporal, but he stayed a Lance Coolie, which for you Army guys is E3. That's another distinction between the Marine Corps and the Army and the other branches, is that these other guys go by their pay grade. I'm an E3, I'm an E2. But in the Marine Corps, it's Lance Corporal, Corporal, Sergeant, Gunnery Sergeant. And there was a time when we weren't even allowed to call gunnery sergeants gunnies. We had to call them Gunnery Sergeant. They changed that back, but it's just a very highly disciplined, structured unit. And pay grade is not something that you use. If you do, you're probably admin or maybe air wing, swing with the wing, more low discipline. But as a general rule, that's another difference. So, man, it's already 100 degrees out here, guys. So today I'm going to go and do a lawyer workout for you. I'm going to try to show you guys. I'm going to try and crank out some pull-ups, some push-ups. As usual, I think I've got a 25-pound plate, or a 35 in my backpack, and I'll try to do some rows, some standing rows, and some stuff like that. Man, I am dying. And then here's what I do. I walk up. This is about a 17% grade. It's about a 17% grade. I'm in Nevada right now, and so they develop these sidewalks because they have flash floods out here. So they have all these different gradients on them to make sure the rainwater goes out into the street and into the gutters. And it's butt kicker, man. If you ever want to go for a walk in Nevada, you better be prepared to be out of breath. So one of the things that I pride myself in is physical fitness. And when I hear people say, oh, I have a condition that prevents me from being in shape, or I have some chemical imbalance, that's just bullshit. That's just a lazy ass motherfucker who doesn't want to take charge of their life. And so, even though I have pretty bad sciatica still, I'm never gonna stop working out. I'm gonna keep training, keep staying motivated, because that is the hallmark of a warrior. And if you're drinking Pepsis and taking all that shit, all those chemicals, that's on you guys, that's on you. That has nothing to do with an eating disorder. It has nothing to do with some condition that you have. That's just a straight excuse maker, which is everything that I was taught is wrong about this country. Is people make up excuses and blame other people for their problems. I mean, even these anti-American insurrectionists over in LA are trying to blame Trump for them looting stores and destroying the city. Like somehow it's his fault that he's trying to enforce our immigration laws. Finally someone's trying to enforce the immigration laws. And we're always taught that, in my family, my father was also a Marine. I've always been brought up that you're responsible for your own actions and correct yourself. So today, what I'm gonna do, I'm not even gonna say try, because try means I won't. And I know I got up too late to really do to do the proper workout. I'm gonna have a lot of civilians over here. A lot of civilians over here at the park. But they have a really cool jungle gym that I found at this park over in Summerlin. And I'm gonna do some pull-ups for you and some push-ups and just show you older guys who can't make it to the gym what you can do to try to stay in shape. And then I'll get into the history of the U.S. Army and the distinction between the U.S. Army and the Navy with respect to our government, our Congress, not wanting to have a standing army, because most of our founding fathers understood that a standing army could be doomed to the republic, and they wanted a very weak central government, unlike what we have now. And the only thing they really wanted was a navy to be able to protect commerce and our borders, because the primary job of the executive branch, contrary to what communist insurgents like Mayor Susan Bass think, was to protect our borders from foreign invasion. Foreign invasion, people that come from countries that are hostile to the United States. And so there was no 2-year requirement for the Navy or the Marine Corps. It was always understood that that would be a permanent part of the federal government's job, which again is primarily to protect our border integrity. Okay, so far so good, guys. It looks like we've got some protection here at the park. I'm gonna let you take a look. So when I can't make it to the gym, what I do is I found this really great jungle gym, and it's got all kinds of cool stuff over here. So I'm gonna, by the way, I'm carrying some weight on me, but this is what I do. I come over here. You can see here we can do rows right here. We can do dips and then regular pull-ups. So bear with me, guys, because, oh man, give me 1 second here. Let me get squared away. Bear with me while I get squared away. I got a camera mount. And so for you guys who make fun of me for being out of breath when I go on these walks, and by the way, I'm 55 now, so I want you to understand I'm not a spring chicken anymore. But for those of you guys who make fun of me for being out of breath, I just want to show you something. In addition to being a judoka and having been involved in Muay Thai, okay, here it comes. All right, so this is why I'm out of breath. So if BZ Watchdog's around, no excuse, brother. If you're a Marine, you better get your shit together. Stop eating all that shit food and square your fucking self away. All right. Now, first thing we're gonna do, all right. Yeah, well, a little sugar's okay. The only time you can have sugar is before, during, and after workout, because what happens is your muscles lose glycogen. And so rather than have the sugar being stored as energy for later, the glycogen goes back into your muscles for later use. So that's the only time you should do it. All right, so let's go ahead and crank out 20 push-ups, all right? All right, if you guys are with me, I want you to do the same thing. All right. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, that was an easy one. Now, if BZ's still here, he's probably going to say that has to be every 1, 2, 3, 1. Well, we'll do that another time. Again, I'm just recovering from sciatica, so just work with me on this. All right, the next one that I'm going to do is what we call upright rows, all right? And I do variations of upright rows, so I'll show you how I do it. We'll do it from the side so you can get an idea. And then I vary it like this. See that? See that, guys? Oh. Oh man, that was an ass kicker. And for those of you just joining me, I'm attorney Michael Ehline. I'm an old codger now, but I'm a Marine Corps vet, and I got motivated because I saw all these Army dogs at this DC parade. Hey BZ, good seeing you, brother. And Scrubzilla, you're right. And by the way, I don't know who it was that recommended this to me, but I've been taking the methylene blue, and I feel, and I don't think it's placebo, I feel that it has helped reduce inflammation big time in my body. And the methylene blue is in here. See if I can get this thing open. And I feel that it is helping me. Let me put it back in my civilian Alice pack. Let me see here. Hey, what's going on, Canon 0311? So I'm gonna try and cover the parade when I get back. I gotta take my son to judo class. I'm training him to be a US Olympic judoka. He had his first tournament last weekend, and and he took second, and he refused to accept the medal because he said there's no such thing as a participation trophy. And I was so proud of him. And it took my wife and I about a week to convince him that we don't give up. We never surrender, and that we were proud of him for competing and going to war. And I was able to convince him that it wasn't winning that mattered to us, but it was that he had the bravery to fight. And I've been in many street fights over my life. I got kicked out of school for fighting, and got a full-time job, moved out of my house when I was 16. And my father signed for me to do that. And I got a full-time job in construction because I grew up in the construction business. And then when I got that high school diploma, I was on a bus to MEPS the very same day. The staff sergeant was there at my graduation and made sure to get me on that bus. So I convinced my son that the right thing to do was to stay motivated and stay with judo and not give up. And he has made leaps and bounds. He's got a really thick neck now. He's put on about 10 pounds of muscle. He looks amazing. I mean, the dude is a little stud. And even though my back is screwed up, I do newaza with him, which is ground fighting. I'm having a hard time with the throws. But I started judo when I was 6. All right, I don't want to get too crazy because I don't want to cool down. So here, we'll do some more upright rows. All right. Now this is the traditional upright row, just like this. Elbows up, elbows high. And then this is the variation. Up and out, up and out. And here I don't count. I just work until exhaustion. All right, and then here's the next one. Next variation. Up and in. Up and in. building your medial and anterior deltoid head, as well as your rear delts. Oh God, that was a killer. So far there's no lazy civilians here, so I'm able to get a decent workout in. You guys still want me to do some more push-ups? Hey Rami, if you want me to do 20 more push-ups, give me a $1.99 super chat, because I'm getting tired. Because I still have to do freaking doggone pull-ups and dips. I'm trying to teach you guys my routine, why there's no excuse for you old guys to not exercise, and that you don't need to go to Powerhouse every day. Some days you want to mix it up, otherwise you'll get bored. So just keep that in mind. All right. Whew. All right. And then Residente Polit Fu, thanks for your comments. Appreciate that. I know not everybody can look as beautiful as me. All right, let's crank out another 20. Even though you guys aren't gonna hook me up, I'm gonna do it for you. All right. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. All right. Now I would do mountain climbers and bends and thrusts, but I just have too bad a sciatica. All right, so the next thing we're gonna do, let's get some pull-ups in. Let's crank them out. And I have nerve pain too, brother. It ain't easy, but nothing worth having in life is easy. All right. All right, so what I'm gonna do is just some regular pull-ups. Now, when I was in the Corps, we had to do 20 pull-ups. And I know that they reduced it to 6 because they allowed us to do kipping, which sort of is like cheating. But the idea is the Marine Corps is the only branch that requires you to have strong lats. The other branches focus more on push-ups and stuff. But we recognize that you could be climbing on cargo nets or have to climb over walls with heavy packs. And your lats are your second largest muscle group. And for you old guys and gals, since they're your second largest muscle group, you want to have strong lats, and you want to have muscular lats because muscles burn fat while you sleep. All right, so you want to have a lot of muscle when you're older to offset that. Oh man, and it definitely works your abs too. Holy shit. Make sure to stretch, guys. Oh man, I guess Chesty doesn't get one for number 7. All right. Hey, thanks Elund Fortain. And now Rami says he recommends MMS and DMSO. I take DMSO now thanks to Rami, but I got to tell you, I think the methylene blue has really helped with my inflammation. Hey Dan, right now I'm weighing about 170. I'm carrying about 10 to 15 pounds too much body fat that I really put on when I was suffering from sciatica. I was on my back for about 2 months, wasn't going live. But I'm back on the high protein diet, low carb diet, drinking a shitload of water, and trying to get myself squared away. So yeah, of course, Rami, I started doing that. Whew. All right. All right, so let's move over to the next station. So the next station we're gonna do is, it's basically, they call them dips, parallel bar dips. And this is what a lot of gymnasts do. All right. I don't know how many I can crank out, guys, but this will build your lower chest, and I'm gonna stretch a little bit. So you see me stretching a little, but not too crazy. You don't wanna go too deep because you can tear up shit inside your joints. I forgot what it's called, but you wanna get a little stretch in. This is gonna build your triceps, your upper rhomboids, and your oh God, triceps. See, it's too early for me. All right, let's do it. I'll try to do as many as I can. I'm not going for numbers right now because I'm still recovering from sciatica. And when I do this, it spreads my plates apart, and I will feel a little bit of nerve pain. But this is also a good way to stretch your spine. All right, here we go. All right, so that's 10. And we'll do one more set of upright rows, and I'll just stay within this workstation so I don't have to move the camera around. And always lift with your legs, see? Legs, don't bend over. And I'll use this to keep my arms together. So, upright rows, but I do variation. So, up and out. And then I do a variation of out and in. Civilians are all scared of me. They're like, who is that guy? Getting all crazy. All right, so, hey, James. I don't think I can give you 20 more. But what I will do is a final set of rows, all right? Do a final set of rows. We'll set it up so the sun is to our back here so you can see what's going on. Let me see. Yeah, that looks pretty squared away. All right, here we go. So all you 20-year-old Antifa members who burn American flags, I'd love to see you guys come out here and PT with me sometime. So in between burning American flags and destroying Los Angeles in support of the Democrat Party, why don't you come and work out with me instead? All right. So 25 pounds, I'll go on a mile or 2 mile walk. So when you guys hear me gasping for breath on these walks and make fun of me, come on out and try this. It's not easy. It's not easy. All right. And again, lift with your legs. Now we're gonna go and do some history lessons at the bench and cool down. All right. Yeah, and I gotta definitely lose some body fat, but I'm doing what I can do, guys. At my age, you don't have a very fast metabolism, so the only way you can offset it is by building muscle. And your testosterone levels go down significantly once you break 40. So what I'm doing is about 20 times harder than anything a teenager would do. But let's go find a cool spot and we'll get into the history of why on this parade day, why the Army historically isn't supposed to exist for a period of longer than 2 years. Man, I'm burning up here. Hopefully you guys are still with me. All right. So not a bad little workout. And I think you guys could do the same if you wanted to. All right. Let me get my water buffalo. Again, methylene blue for you guys who are suffering from inflammation. I swear by it now. It works, in my opinion. Not medical advice, of course. What's going on, Kwana? Okay. So, hey, Gloria, I don't know. I'm not looking at everything. I'm trying to get my breath back. Stand by. That's the first time I showed you guys my 25-pound plate that I carry in my pack. Sometimes I carry a 45, so that's why I'm always out of breath when I go on these walks, because I'm carrying a ton of weight with me. But that's what we do, because in the Ehline family, it's do or die. There's no excuse making. There's no try. Try means I won't. It's do or die. All right, stand by. Let me get some nicotine. I know Life Under's gonna kill me for this. Yeah, so brain for brain, you're right, sprints are fun, but I have pretty bad sciatica at the L4, L5, so I've been really working hard on trying to keep the impact down to let that bulge shrink. That's right, Scrubzilla. Yeah, just 25 pounds, that's right, man. But you also gotta do resistance training. Resistance training is, I would say, the single most important thing someone over 40 can do to square themselves away. And you're probably right, Nub's Revenge, and I do take all the herbs as well. I mean, you should see my cabinet. It's filled with everything from ginseng to goto kolai or gotu, whatever it's called. Every Chinese herb you can think of. I mean, I'm doing it. I take basil and rosemary extract, the anti-parasite cleanse. I'm getting ready to go on a fast for 2 days so I can cleanse my body even more to try to fight off cancer and things like that. But I'm doing it all, and luckily I have people like Life Under the Microscope and guys like you to sort of guide me and counsel me on this journey into old age. But now let's get into what I do know, which is history and the law, especially military history, which is my first love. And since there's a parade today, I thought, you know what, let's get into this. So, okay. Although the Navy and the Army are funded every 2 years as part of an appropriations process, the Army is the only one that's of significance because they just sort of bunch the Navy in together. Because the Navy is the only constitutionally required military branch that we have. And because of that, it's not subject to being refunded every 2 years. And this dates back from Because remember, most of our founding fathers spoke at least 3 to even 7 languages. They were classically educated. They spoke Latin, Greek, typically French, because they were trading languages, right, of Europe. There were no such thing as law schools, so they became lawyers like me. They studied under a judge or a lawyer, and then ultimately they had to stand before the court and be tested with an oral examination, and then they would be admitted to pass the bar. In other words, to stand next to the judge. That's called passing the bar. And so I became a lawyer that way, the same way that John Jay did, the same way that most of our founding fathers did. In fact, all of our founding fathers, because I don't even think there were law schools in this country until the mid to early 1800s, if I'm not mistaken. And correct me if I'm wrong. All right, so this is a little bit of history about why they felt the way they did about standing armies. Okay, they did not like the concept of a standing land-based army. And it dates back to the Roman, I don't know if I'm saying this right, the Pomerium. And so the Pomerium was the boundary that the military was not allowed to cross in Rome. So the standing military, the standing army was not allowed to cross the Pomerium. It was a violation of the laws of the Republic because the Romans knew that a powerful general could invade and destroy the Republic and establish a dictatorship. And that's why our founding fathers in particular did not want a strong centralized government. They wanted a weak centralized government because they knew that if power was distributed equally among the people, that it would be harder to gain centralized control. And even modernly, we have libertarians like me who we're anti-federalists, and we believe in states' rights and state powers. And then you have like the Democrats on the other opposite end. They're more like the royalists under the king. They want a strong centralized government. They want to be able to have total control over every aspect of your lives. And if you disagree with them, you're considered to be a racist, bigot, and a homophobe. And that's pretty much the distinguishing factor. So under the Pomerium, this was a sacred boundary, and it was designed to separate military versus civil law. And that's really what it was all about. And the first time there was a violation of this was when Sulla versus Marius. So Sulla wanted to take power from Marius. Mauritius, maybe it was Mauritius. This is based on memory. And that was in, I believe, 88 BC. And do your research. And then the next time it happened was Caesar when he crossed the Rubicon. And that was in 49 BCE. So this is sort of the history of how this started. So our founding fathers wanted to avoid a Julius Caesar. And they knew that if we had a very strong military or that lasted for longer than 2 years, that would be a problem. The only time our founding fathers wanted to raise a land army was in case we needed to invade another country that violated our sovereignty or protect our border. And I think for the first 100 years of our existence, we had our army on the border with Mexico because Mexico constantly raided our states from across the border and ravaged and pillaged our women and took them as slaves. And so a lot of people don't know that was the reason primarily for the Mexican-American War. It was that Mexico was unable to secure the border, and they were allowing bandits like Pancho Villa, for example, to raid across our border. So we would have a standing army to protect our southern border primarily. And ultimately, Mexico invited Americans to come into Texas to support their Tejanos, the local Texans, from Indian raids and from bandits that were coming in from Mexico. And the Texans were unhappy with the Mexican government not being able to provide them with security. And that is when the Texans asked the United States to intervene. And from that came the Mexican-American War, and America won. And as part of the Treaty of Hidalgo, the Mexican government, in exchange for what amounts to $500 million today, and for us forgiving Mexico's debt, signed the Treaty of Hidalgo, which ceded California, Texas, Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and I think some other territories to the United States. And in exchange, it was a bargain for exchange where the American government paid the Mexican government off. And the American government promised to honor Mexican land grants that were in existence or allow the Mexican citizenry to move back to Mexico if they didn't want to become Americans. So contrary to what they tell you at these left-wing communist riots that are funded primarily by communist China, that's the reality, that's the truth. It wasn't stolen, it was conquered. And even though we conquered it, we also paid the Mexican government off and agreed to forgive their debts to us, because America helped fund the Mexicans in their war against Spain as well as the French Foreign Legion. None of this is taught in public schools. So our American army was on the Mexican border to protect the United States from raids and interventions from Mexican bandits as well as Indians. And still, our founding fathers knew that having a standing army for longer than 2 years could mean doom for the Republic, like it did for Rome. Remember, Caesar basically abolished the Republic and became a dictator. And I believe that's where the word dictator comes from, is from Caesar, just to give you a little history lesson. So ultimately, the United States Army was very limited in function. It was always understood that we had two types of militias in this country. We had regulars and irregulars. All men 16 and older are automatically presumed to be members of the irregular militia. It was always intended that we could mobilize our militia to defend against foreign invaders, and that is what a militiaman is. It had nothing to do with the National Guard, because the National Guard can be federalized. And because of states' rights and states' rights and states' duties under the 10th Amendment, it was always understood historically that each state had its own militias that it could call upon in times of disaster or war. And up until just recently, it was always understood that each state is considered a sovereign country. The California Republic, for example, even though it was a territory, once it became in 1849 a state, it was subject to the same rights, duties, and privileges as any of the other 13 colonies. So there was never a need for a standing army. Why? Because our founding fathers never expected us to engage in foreign entanglements, and I've got some other videos about that. And you're welcome, Matthew, and this is something you won't learn in a left-wing Marxist public school, because they're trying to push us into a one-world globalist agenda, one-world globalist government, and we don't want that, because we're sovereign Americans, we want our freedom. All right, so let's get into a little bit of the history. So each fiscal year, in order to maintain the U.S. Army, the Department of Defense has to go before Congress and ask for appropriations, okay? Now, although the Navy does this, they're not required to under the Constitution. The Navy is the one thing that is required under our Constitution to protect our borders from foreign invasion and to protect commerce, all right? So sea lanes. And then the militia was always intended to protect our northern and southern border. So if you were in the Texas militia, it would be your job to defend against Pancho Villa, for example. And if it got out of hand, you could call upon the federal government, and they could federalize what's called the irregular militia. But regular militia. Don't confuse regulars with the national federalized continentals, okay? All right, man, that freaking nicotine just killed me, woo. Just to give you a little bit of legal history. Okay, and by the way, guys, everybody, welcome to my show. I'm attorney Michael Ehline. I've been a practicing lawyer for about 20 years. Prior to that, I was a construction worker, blue-collar guy. I had a construction company. I also owned partnerships in several health clubs. I helped start the LA Fitness Health Club chain in Anaheim Hills, along with Chin, Yol Yi, and Louis Welch of LA Fitness. I was their #1 salesman at the Anaheim Hills location off Santiago Canyon or Knoll Ranch Road in Anaheim Hills. I also worked for I forgot their names already, but the owners of Family Fitness, which ultimately became 24-Hour Fitness, and was into bodybuilding and stuff like that, and had a limousine company. I was Rodney Dangerfield's limousine driver. Hey, that Rodney for you old guys. So I've always been an entrepreneur first. But because of my construction company and having to deal with people before the Contractor State Licensing Board making complaints to avoid having to pay me, I realized that I could pay a lawyer or I could learn the law. And so I became a paralegal, and then ultimately, after getting beat up by a West Covina cop in front of a Bally's Total Fitness, where I was the corporate wellness director, over a parking ticket, and me asking him for his IDs before we had cell phones, And then I was charged with resisting, obstructing, delaying under Penal Code Section 148. I realized that it was time for me to become a lawyer. But with no formal legal education and no desire to go to a college and deal with all those woke idiots, because they were even woke idiots back then, I was able to find a way to become a lawyer on an obscure program called the California State Bar Law Office Study Program, which is the same program that Kim Kardashian is on. So just for the people who are joining me a little bit late, and I have a book that I wrote about it called My Journey to Becoming a Practicing Lawyer with No Law Degree or Undergrad. I slept on park benches and saved the money that I had from selling my interest in the limousine business down in Carlsbad that I owned with a partner. Slept on park benches, got a job working at Home Depot for like 10 bucks an hour or whatever, and then slept on park benches, took the big blue bus back and forth to Venice where I slept, and ultimately worked my way up and was able to get personal injury attorneys to bring me in as an intern, a non-paid intern, where I worked for free and learned litigation. So that's why I'm so good at personal injury law. But my first love is civil rights, and I also worked for a civil rights lawyer who was one of the best appellate lawyers in the state of California. But he was a lefty and I'm not, and so that didn't work out because I'm a Second Amendment rights guy, and as you know, most of these girly men who are Democrats hate guns and they're terrified of their own shadow, and they think we should be disarmed and not be able to defend ourselves. So that didn't work out for me. So I ended up also working for some Second Amendment rights attorneys, and then ultimately I got a job as a judicial extern for the California Court of Appeal. And by the time I got done with the law study program, I was making about 15,000 bucks a week doing paralegal work and stuff like that, making real money. So I just want to not use that to brag, but to tell you guys that if you stay after the task after 12 months and you keep staying after the task, that good things will happen. But prayer is also important, meditation, and physical fitness is the number one thing that I could tell you. You have to be physically fit because your body is your temple. And so I would read Psalms and Proverbs, exercise, and do whatever I could to stay in shape in order to get through the immense stress of studying and then working the night shift at Home Depot, and then ultimately that got me into a better position. And I was in charge of litigation for several different law firms so these lawyers could go and play golf or whatever it is that they did. Maybe burning American flags, because we know most personal injury attorneys are basically a bunch of commies who like to sue people who have small businesses and basically rape them, right? So I don't have a lot of respect for most personal injury attorneys, but I'd like to think that the work that I do as a personal injury attorney is honorable because I primarily represent military veterans who are disabled and help them when they're getting screwed by insurance companies. And I know it's easy to say we're all ambulance chasers or whatever, but I can assure you I'd rather be at the gym than chasing an ambulance. So that's just to give you a little bit of my background, knowledge, and skill. Good seeing you, Sir Richard the Lionheart. And I believe you're in Australia, if I'm not mistaken, Mike. So good seeing you today. And then now Tinfoil Hatter says, how are you a native legalese then? Well, so I'm a little bit different than most guys that you're gonna meet. So although I don't have a big background being part of the far left communist run education system, when I grew up, my parents got divorced at a young age. Dad wasn't around that much. And so I spent my time at the library. And so I pretty much read every single book there was at the library from the age of 6 onward. I was already able to read and write fluently by the time I was 7. Because my parents, with the little money they had, my dad still cared about me, but because my mom had left him and he was a Vietnam vet and destroyed from the war, the only way he could get over her was to go and dig ditches for $2 an hour. And ultimately he became the general manager for development of all the Denny's restaurants and Winchell's Donuts in the United States. In fact, any Denny's restaurant that you see that was built before 1980 throughout the entire United States, my dad built that. And so that was my background. And so my parents used what little money they had to put me through private Christian schools. And so because of that, I was able to develop my IQ, and I have about a 160 IQ. I was able to develop that, and I just had an insatiable desire to learn. So I spent my time reading books at the library and then ultimately going to the law library. And I was just fascinated with the law. So that's how I know legalese. And a little bit of Latin as well, even though I don't have the benefit of having a scholastic education from a regular school, okay? So anyways, and I told you earlier, I dropped out of regular school at 16, Got in trouble for fighting. My dad had me in judo also since I was 6, and because I'm a smaller guy, I would get picked on, because bullies like to pick on guys they think they can beat. And so I used to throw guys, and I got in trouble for throwing a guy in his head and got kicked out of school. And I ended up getting a full-time job as a painter's apprentice, moved out of my house when I was 16 with my father's permission, who was also, again, an inactive U.S. Marine. So my background is really, really based on that Japanese samurai-style discipline. And so ultimately, once I graduated high school, I was on a bus to MEPS into the Marine Corps. I was disabled from the Marine Corps in a training injury, but I attribute most of my discipline and success from the time that I had in the Marine Corps. And so that is the story that we have today. But my father never touched me, Ryder. My father was a brute, but that stern discipline that he imparted upon me was what enabled me to have a family today and be a provider and a caretaker, and to not make the same mistakes he made. Obviously, not to marry a woman when you're 19 is one of the best things that I can tell you. And if you do marry a woman, find someone from a third world country like El Salvador, where they have traditional values. Because if you're a man like me, you need that support, because you know that you were born to provide love and support and protection for your family. And so that's the difference between me and most of American guys, is we marry one of these girls who went to like a university, got brainwashed with feminism, right? Where they think that their life needs to be spent in a cubicle, and then they're destroyed by the time they're in a position to where they want to get married, and the men don't want to have anything to do with them. So they end up with a beta male, and they get divorced anyways. And then the kids have no father. And even if they would have had a father, it would have been a beta male. And so you have men who are weak. And so I have a different mentality. So now let's get back into it. Yeah, and my stomach is bad, and you're right. I have a really bad hernia, and I've been suffering from sciatica, Murat Altunas. And I'm working on it. And I had a pretty lean, squared away stomach about 3 months ago before I got hit with the sciatica. But I'm not making up excuses. That's why I'm here at the gym working out. Not the gym, but I'm walking and exercising and doing whatever I can to get squared away. Okay, so again. And then Card Sharky, a beta male is a beta male. Go to any college campus and you'll see a bunch of them running around burning American flags. Okay, so let's get into it. So all U.S. military branches, including the Army and the Navy, receive funding through annual appropriations bills passed by Congress, as mandated by the U.S. Constitution under Article 1, Section 8. These bills, such as the National Defense Authorization Act and the Department of Defense Appropriation Act, set funding levels and priorities for each fiscal year from October 1st through September 30th, okay? There is no specific requirement for the Army to be refunded every 2 years, but historically, I explained to you why earlier, our government never wanted a standing Army for longer than 2 years. And it's because they didn't want to have a situation where we would have mutinies or overthrows of our government, like they had in other Roman civil law democracies. And they tried to take those lessons from Rome. Now, the Navy isn't exempt from the funding renewals, but constitutionally it's required to exist to protect our borders from foreign invasion and to protect commerce. Hopefully that's making sense so far. Hey, good seeing you, Darren and Scrubzilla. Now, constitutionally, the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 12, states that Congress has the power to raise and support armies, but no appropriation of money to that use shall be for a longer term than 2 years. You follow me so far? There's that 2 years again. And this clause applies specifically to the Army, not the Navy. And since the Marines are under the Department of the Navy, the men's department, of course, they're also exempt from this requirement. But for purposes of just making it easier for Congress, they do go through the every 2 years appropriations, okay? But it's not necessary. And by the way, good seeing you, HR Ratnick and Gloria Ad. Thanks again for joining me. Mr. Osgood, good seeing you, brother. Awesome. So in contrast, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 13 grants Congress the power to provide and maintain a Navy without a similar 2-year funding limitation, okay? This distinction reflects the historical view that a standing Navy was necessary for continuous maritime defense, while a standing Army could pose a risk to liberty. And that's why we have that 2-year. And that's why, look, our founding fathers relied upon the fact that all males 16 and over were automatically part of the irregular militia for their state. And we knew that if there was a national invasion, that the state's militias would form to fight that invasion off. We weren't intended to be invading other countries. The Marines were used as an expeditionary force for that purpose, for things like the shores of Tripoli, where we would have to rescue American hostages, for example, okay? But traditionally, the Marines were force multipliers, much like the Green Beret. So the Green Berets are force multipliers, and that's what the Marines were doing. So there was never enough Marines to really invade a country, so they would form alliances with the armies or the bandits who opposed the governments of those other countries, such as Tripoli, Libya, and then they would use them as an alliance or a force multiplier, which basically means you bring in other people, indigenous forces, and you train them, similar to how MARSOC operates today. Hopefully you guys are getting a nice history lesson. And notice that I don't need to look at my notes for that, because this is just me knowing history. All right. Something you'll never learn in a Marxist-run college, by the way. Okay. And that's right. Hey, Navy nurses are on Marine Base. Hey, look, brother, Card Sharky, I am all about the Navy. We just make fun of each other because the Navy, they don't have that same standard of discipline and training that we have. We're much more physical, and we're the most highly disciplined of all the military branches. Because in the Marine Corps, even if you're a cook, you may have to be thrown in the line with a regular infantryman like me and know how to fight alongside of me. Although you may not be at the same level as me as an infantryman, you're going to be under the command of infantry officers, and you're going to have to know how to do what we know how to do. But it's, obviously your primary MOS is cook, right? But we don't have, in the Marine Corps, we don't have our own medics. We rely on the Navy. And Riley, that's a good question. And by the way, we always spell Marines with an uppercase M, so I know that you were not in the Marine Corps. Hey, Ryan, good seeing you. Hey, you're interrupting me there, you. Shut your doggone mouth, huh? I just had to tell that heckler over there to shut his doggone mouth. Some bird over there heckling. Okay, so the Army Rangers, in my opinion, are the most badass mother effers on the planet. And I have nothing but respect for Rangers. And I know that the Marines and the Army make fun of each other, but the Army does have some outstanding units. And one of them is the Rangers, the other one would be the Green Berets, and of course Delta, the unit, right? And so a lot of my friends who are in Anglico as well as in MARSOC have worked with the Rangers, and they've got nothing but good things to say about them. The Rangers are at a similar level of discipline as a typical rank and file Marine, but they have a much bigger budget, and they undergo a similar training schedule as Marine Corps Force Reconnaissance or Anglico or MARSOC. But they fight in battalion strength, and they're just amazing guys. And I have friends who are Rangers from the 75th, and they're awesome. In fact, a few days ago, I brought my son to the park. We get up at like 05:30 because I'm training him to be an Olympic judoka. Don't want him to join the Marines because now the Marine Corps has female drill instructors. Are you kidding me? And they don't have to pass the same phys qual as the males. So it's part of that DEI thing started by Obama, which degregates the Marine Corps big time. And I've got nothing against female Marines, but remember, the original purpose of the women in the Marine Corps was to free a man for combat. They don't have the same physicality as men. And so my friends who had their sons go in the Marine Corps, they said it was a joke. The female drill instructors do not have to pass the same phys qual as the males, so you're being led by someone who's not as strong as you and physically can't do the same things that you're expected to do as a male Marine. So naturally, that breaks down unit cohesion, and I believe that it was a disgrace for the Marine Corps to allow that to happen. Absolute disgrace. So let's move on. And again, Army Rangers, love you guys. And of course, my drill instructors used to make fun of the Rangers, but in a fun kind of way, that a Ranger is a basically trained Marine. The only difference, from my perspective, is that Rangers don't have to go through our boot camp. And our boot camp is longer and harder and more difficult than any of the other branches. And we learned the history of the Marine Corps. And so that's what builds cohesion in the Marines. We learn about Chesty Puller, we learn about our amazing battle history. Remember, Marines hold 2/3 of all the medals of honor, but yet we're the smallest branch. I think at our biggest we've ever been is a couple 100,000 of us. And when you figure that, there's only like 30,000 infantrymen, and those are the guys who usually win the MOH. So that's another thing. And yeah, Dr. Reyes, Donald Trump didn't deport my neck. That's from being 55 years old and having sciatica and eating like a pig. So I have no excuse, and I am definitely accepting your challenge. I went back on a high-protein diet about a week ago, and I definitely, man, you know, see, I don't take that as an insult when somebody notices that, because I'm ashamed of myself for allowing myself to get this extra body fat. It's a disgrace. So keep that in mind, guys. I'm not making up excuses. You're absolutely right. What next as well? No, it's true. I'm carrying I'm carrying about 10 to 15 pounds too much body fat. However, I am still able to bench press over 305 for 12 to 15 reps. And again, I'm carrying a 25-pound weight in my backpack as I'm walking around here. No, it's all good, D. Reyes. I can handle the jokes. I'm not a snowflake. I'm not one of you lefties who spent my time on some commie college campus who thinks that men are women. I understand my role as a man, and making up excuses is not part of my vocabulary, so I'm going to make it happen, do or die. Now, in practice, despite the constitutional language, all right, the 2-year limit on Army appropriations is not strictly enforced in the modern budget process. Congress appropriates funds for all military branches, including the Army, on an annual basis. The Army does not face a unique biennial funding requirement per se, but constitutionally, again, our founding fathers realized that they did not want to have a standing army. And in fact, in Rome, the army wasn't allowed to enter into the gates of Rome. I talked to you earlier about that border. Now, Riley Murphy about joining the Marine Corps, option 40 contract and all that. Look, a lot of my friends who are now in the Army, who were Marines, say, go Army. But that's, of course, because they had the benefit of being Marines. And the only reason they say that is because their bodies are all fucked up from being in the Marine Corps, and they wanted to skate and still get their retirement. So if you join the Marine Corps right now, especially if we're not in combat, you'll be lucky if you get out after 4 years as a corporal, an E4 in the Army. If you, after 4 years in the Army with Marine Corps training, you might get out as a sergeant first class, which would be the Marine Corps' equivalent of a gunnery sergeant. So if you're just looking for money, if you're looking for college, if you're looking for free stuff, not free stuff, but more benefits, you join the Army or the Navy or the other branches. So I'll explain it to you in an easier way. You join the Army, you join the Navy, you join the Coast Guard, you join the Air Force, but you become a United States Marine. You become a United States Marine. You're a Marine for life. And so wherever I am in this world, and I can usually spot them by the way they walk and their bearing, because we still have that bearing and discipline and that can-do attitude. I know that if I meet a Marine, that we're part of a fraternity and that I have a couch to sleep on. And that would be what I say separates us from the other branches. You might get more money, you might get more benefits. You will get more money, you will get more benefits from the other branches financially. But with respect to the brotherhood and the fraternity, the Marine Corps is the way to go. So if I was you, if it was me personally, if they didn't have female drill instructors teaching male Marines, I would say go Marines. I think your only option now would be the French Foreign Legion. I can't think of any other branch that is similar to the Marine Corps in discipline and physicality than the French Foreign Legion. If you're really a gung-ho motherfucker like me, that's what I would do. Thanks, Tom, about the haircut. Yeah, I try to be squared away even though I'm old. Now, so let's get into it. The Navy's funding is more stable due to the long-term investments in shipbuilding and ship construction, and of course the historical context of the necessity of a standing Navy to protect our borders and maritime commerce. So, and then Nick Kaufman, you need to stop watching CNN, okay? Most of the people on my channel are intelligent enough to know that the funding for these riots and the lie that California is stolen land is being spread by communist China and billionaires who hate America. And those are the same people who are dropping off pallets of bricks so you can throw them at the police, and then they can use their Stingray technology and eventually 6G facial recognition technology to throw guys like you in concentration camps. So don't fall for it, guys. It's just a testing ground for them to test their surveillance technology. I'm a civil libertarian, so I believe in less government and more freedom. So unlike you guys who go to colleges who think that the government should control every aspect of your life. All right, so when Congress fails to pass a new appropriations bill by the start of the fiscal year, it will often rely on a continuing resolution to keep the Army funded. Otherwise, it would have to be disbanded. So just to give you a different idea of what's going on. And Daddy Vet, I did a show last night. Check it out. I did a live last night that covers exactly 6G as well as the Stingray technology. It's about 2 hours. It takes a while. I'm going to try to break it up into segments and make them as shorts, but yeah, you can learn all about it, brother, but it's real and it's freaking scary as hell. It is scary what's going on. And Palantir is leading the way, and I'm very terrified for your children with what's going on over in the Middle East, that we're going to get sucked into another foreign entanglement, which is exactly what George Washington warned of and why our founding fathers did not want to have the standing army for more than 2 years. And thank you, Randall Hill, again for your compliments. And Przemysław, thank you also from Poland. And you know a little bit about foreign entanglements and being invaded, right? So, and I love the Poles, by the way. My uncle's by marriage, through a marriage, is Polish, and I have a lot of respect for the Poles. And I love it that you kept the jihadists out of your country despite this globalist population replacement that's being used by the enemies of your people to try and replace the populace with very low IQ sub-Saharan Africans who are easy to control with a free welfare check. So congratulations. Now, let's get into it. In 2025, military leaders warned that a full year CR would hinder modernization and readiness across all branches, with specific concerns about Army training and Navy shipbuilding. So it underscores that both branches face funding problems. But again, constitutionally, and I never said, Scythian, that we shouldn't have a military. I said that we're not supposed to have a standing army because the Constitution prohibits that for longer than a period of 2 years. So perhaps you should get your head out of your ass and start reading some history and learn the Constitution, which I'm trying to teach people here who actually want to learn, unlike people like you who obviously have too much time on your hands. Go back and play with your Nintendo and leave the adults alone, because this is the adults club. The boys club is down the street. So budget comparisons. Typically, the Navy gets more money, $203.87 billion in 2025, as opposed to the Army's $185.5 billion. The Navy has a higher budget because of ships and subs and aircraft carriers and all that. And by the way, guys, tell me if you agree that we don't need aircraft carriers anymore. I mean, they're basically a big target with the sonic missile technology. That stuff's going to get blown out of the water. My belief is that we should have more submarines, and they should have drone interface to where they can pop up, launch drones, and that'll be the end of it. Manned aircraft are a thing of the past. That's something I do believe and agree with Elon Musk about. Give me a bunch of ones if you guys agree that with modern technology, aircraft carriers are sitting ducks, and I just think it's part of the military-industrial complex raping the American people. All right, and Ryan M., you know what? The Corps got rid of tanks is part of that new Pacific, oh gosh, I forgot the name, but it's just part of the new thing that we're trying to use, where they have Marines spread across the littoral force to sort of hem China in. But look, a lot of my Marine brothers are tankers, and they ended up going Army. But I think we still need tanks. But I think that they need to be protected by an umbrella of drones. Okay, so let's get into the historical context. The constitutional distinction between Army and Navy funding may lead to the belief that the Army faces stricter funding cycles, which it doesn't, but it does have a constitutional restriction that Congress shall allow no standing Army for a longer than a period of 2 years. And so the way they get around that constitutional requirement is to revalidate it every 2 years, and it just happens to go along with the spending. Oh, and absolutely, Taimai. I think that drone combat changes everything. And I have several Marine brothers who are over there right now as mercenaries fighting on behalf of Ukraine. And I've just heard some really horrible stories about those drones, and it's definitely scary. Scary, scary stuff. So, and Daddy Vet, no one's misrepresenting the Constitution. I just read to you earlier exactly what the Constitution says, so you can take it or leave it. So the constitutional distinction may lead to the belief that the Army faces stricter funding cycles, which it doesn't, but that's only because of the way that the Appropriations Committee is set up. Some argue that the Navy has been prioritized. I think it probably is and probably needs to be because of the need to protect maritime commerce as well as what's going on with the Houthis and all that. But we've seen how vulnerable our ships are, right? Our surface fleet is with these drone attacks and these, what do they call them? Subsonic or sonic missiles. So that's kind of scary. Both branches face recruiting challenges, especially since they became woke. Under Trump, we've seen an uptick because most men who want to join the military don't want to have a commander who wears a dress and talks with a lisp because they don't have confidence that somebody like that could lead them in combat. But the Marine Corps, fortunately, because we've really resisted all the woke leftist crap, never had a recruitment issue, even through the dark days of the leftist, communist, woke governments that we've had in the last 4 years. So we were able to sort of dodge that bullet. Okay, so the Army and the Navy are both funded through the annual federal budget process, but again, the Navy is the only branch that is authorized to permanently exist because our Constitution prohibits a standing army for longer than a period of 2 years, unless it's reappropriated. Okay, so let's get into the historical context to deal with the vet guy, Daddy Vet. Right, armies. So there you go, Daddy Vet, and that's exactly what I said. So Navy and the Marine Corps is not considered armies. Armies always meant a land-based force, and our founding fathers were terrified of a land-based army because they knew the history, because they were smart. They didn't go to an American college, so they weren't brainwashed. And so they understood that a standing army could be used to have an insurrection with a general, for example, a military coup. And so they were terrified of a standing army, and that's why they relied upon militias. And so we had continentals, regulars, and irregulars. Regulars typically could be federalized in times of war, but all men 16 and over are automatically considered to be part of the irregular militia. And the Second Amendment pretty much states that there shall be no law, right? But the militia has to be well regulated. What it failed to do was distinguish between the two types of militias that we had and have, which are regulars and irregulars. And so the irregular militia is all of us, whereas regulars could be federalized. I hope this is making sense. Because again, all of the states are considered to be sovereign countries. Sovereign countries. Federalism is not something I believe in to begin with. I am an anti-federalist, a Jeffersonian. And I'm also a libertarian, if you were going to put a label on me. So the Constitution limits appropriations for the Army to no more than 2 years under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 12. And this stems from the Founding Fathers' concerns about potential dangers of a standing army and their desire to ensure civilian control over the military. This provision reflects the political, philosophical, and historical circumstances of the late 18th century, particularly the American colonies' experiences with British military power and Enlightenment ideas, like natural law, for example, John Locke, right? Look it up for all you guys who got brainwashed by the woke school system. Learn about Enlightenment ideas and natural law and John Locke. That would be the best thing I could tell you to do. And their experiences with British military power, obviously, the king was the centralized control, and we didn't want centralized control. And remember, the main reason for our revolution, contrary to what you were taught in the Democrat-run school systems, NEA and California Teachers Association, far-left Marxist organizations, they don't teach you any of this stuff, okay? But it was the powder houses. So the king tried to seize our powder houses, which is where the colonists stored their gunpowder, because he knew if we had the ability to defend ourselves, we would be able to throw off an unjust government. And so once he tried to seize our powder houses, it was on. But again, less than 3% of the population, by estimates, actually participated in the fighting against the king. So even modernly today, there's like 3% like me and most of my audience, and then the rest of you guys who just want a free handout from the government, who will just put your finger in the wind. Whatever way the wind blows, that's the way you're going to go. The political winds, and I'm not that guy. So during the American Revolution, the colonists experienced the oppressive use of British standing armies, which were often quartered in private homes and used to enforce unpopular views like the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, etc. Events like the Boston Massacre in 1770, as well as the seizing of the powder houses led to the distrust of permanent military forces controlled by a distant government, in this case, DC government. The Declaration of Independence specifically listed grievances against King George III, including the maintenance of standing armies without consent of our legislatures. So standing armies without consent, and then rendering the military independent of a superior civil power. So that's what they wanted to do, is make sure that our military would not be independent of the civil power. And even then, they were terrified of generals, okay? So philosophical concerns. Enlightenment thinkers like myself, John Locke, Montesquieu, influenced the founders' views on the dangers of standing armies. They argued that permanent, and this is for you, Mr. Vet, could be used by a tyrannical government to suppress liberty and undermine democratic, well, it wasn't democratic, this is wrong. There's nothing in any of our founding documents that talks about democracies or democratic institutions. America is a constitutional republic, okay? A democracy, by its very definition, means mob rules. It means that the majority can decide to take away the rights of the minority or the individual. Under a constitutional republic, the government is bound by the chains of the Constitution. Remember this, the government is bound by the chains of the Constitution, and individual rights are paramount above what the mob wants. But when we flood our country with 20 million illegals from foreign civil law democracies, they do believe that the majority should be able to vote away the rights of the minority. That's how it works. And we don't believe as real Americans that the mob should be able to vote away our property rights. And you've seen that happen in Democrat states like California. And that's why California is losing about, on average, 200,000 small business owners and families with kids who don't want their kids to be brainwashed in the woke public schools. So they're leaving, and they're being replaced by illegal aliens, and they immediately get free health care and free everything. And in exchange, the census redistricts California. By some estimates, California would lose 5 Democrat House seats, if the illegal aliens were removed from California, because they use the United States Census to redistrict, just to give you a little history lesson. So the idea was, by many founding fathers, particularly the anti-federalists like me, that a standing army in peacetime poses a threat to a republican form of government, as it could be used to enforce the will of central authority against the states or the people. Okay. During the Constitutional Convention, delegates debated the balance between national security and the risks of a strong federal military. The clause granting Congress the power to raise and support armies, but no appropriation money to be used longer than a period of 2 years, was a compromise. It was a compromise between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists like myself. Thank you, Life Under the Microscope. And the 2-year limit was designed to ensure frequent congressional oversight of the Army, requiring Congress to revisit and approve military funding at least biennially. This aligned with the 2-year election cycle for the House of Representatives, ensuring that the people's elected representatives could regularly check the military's power. The clause was not applied to the Navy again, reflecting a belief that a standing Navy poses less of a threat because it's designed to defend us from outside forces, and also to protect commerce, which is the primary driver of the American economy, is being able to trade. Our founders did not want us getting involved in foreign entanglements. And in fact, in one of the shorts that I did yesterday, my friend Brett Pike, if you want to go and look at my short from yesterday, Brett Pike talks about faux leadership. And I just want you to look at that. In his farewell address, he talked about us getting involved in foreign entanglements and how that would be dangerous to the Republic. All right, so navies operate at sea far from civilian populations and were seen as essential, again, for protecting trade and national borders without the same risk of internal oppression. And of course, the Marine Corps is used as an expeditionary force and was basically used as a force multiplier, similar to how the Green Berets are used modernly. So we would form alliances with indigenous forces who were opposed to the centralized authorities of their day, similar to what happened during the Battle of Tripoli. Remember, it's part of our halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. Guys, remember that? If you're a Marine, you remember the Marine Corps hymn, right? And your general orders and everything else. Another thing that separates us from the other branches. In any event, the Marines were our first force multiplier, so at least overseas. So we worked with indigenous forces. And then, of course, the Continentals and regular militias were force multipliers as well, because all of the Indians were at war with each other as they were nomadic tribes. And so our Continentals and our irregular militias would form alliances with the other warring Indian tribes, and we would work with them to fight off the other Indian tribes. And that is how the Spanish actually were able to conquer the Aztec Empire. There were only 150 of them by most estimates, and they formed alliances with other warring Indian tribes who hated the Aztecs. And if you watch the movie Apocalypto, you'll be able to understand why. Anyways, let's get into it a little bit more here. And then if you look at the Federalist Papers, which were not really very popular until just recently, it talks about Alexander Hamilton addressing concerns about standing armies and arguing that the 2-year appropriation limit was a safeguard against misuse of military power. He noted that it would force Congress to deliberate regularly on the necessity and size of the Army, preventing the executive from maintaining a permanent force without legislative consent. So James Madison in the Federalist number 41 further emphasized that the 2-year limit ensured the Army remained under civilian control, as Congress could withhold funding if the military's actions or size became excessive. So give me a bunch of ones if you're following me so far. So let's talk about the contrast with the Navy. Under the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8, Clause 13, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 13, the Congress has the power to provide and maintain a Navy without a similar 2-year funding restriction. The distinction reflects several factors, which we discussed. Obviously, a lower domestic threat was the main reasoning. And then make sure to double tap and hit that like and subscribe button. If you double tap for me, that's going to get me some likes. And then anybody who wants to throw me a super chat or purchase some memberships, I'll answer your questions if I see that little orange or green thing pop up, just based on any legal questions that you might have related to this. So under the Articles of Confederation, 1777 through 1789, the central government lacked the authority to raise a national army or levy taxes directly, relying instead on state militias and voluntary contributions. And again, we were a tariff-based economy prior to the privately run Federal Reserve bribing and destroying our country. And we need to return to a tariff-based economy and abolish the income tax. Give me a bunch of ones if you agree that bankers need to stay away from the constitutional powers of Congress, and we need to return control of money back to we, the people, instead of being on a fiat-based currency system. All right, give me a bunch of ones on that. Give me a bunch of twos if you think that I'm one of these right-wing wackos. And that way I'll know that you know nothing about the history of this country, and then my moderators can decide how they want to deal with you. So the European powers, like Britain, maintained permanent navies without the same fear of domestic tyranny, and the founders viewed a navy as less controversial and a necessity for a coastal nation, which is, you know, we're not really a coastal nation, but now we are, coast to coast, right? So basically, the Articles of Confederation, many say, led to a significant weakness during the Revolution as the Continentals struggled with funding and supplies, and we know that they did struggle. The Constitution's provision for a federal military were the response to these weaknesses. Say many, I don't believe that, but the 2-year limit on Army appropriations was a safeguard to prevent the central government from amassing unchecked military power, like we discussed again. So the Shays Rebellion, the uprising in Massachusetts, highlighted the need for the federal military to address domestic threats, allegedly, but reinforced the fears of the standing army. So the rebellion underscored the tension between national security and liberty, influencing the inclusion of the 2-year limit. That's why it's so important. And it would ensure that the Army remained accountable to Congress. Now, many founders, including people like me, anti-federalists, preferred state militias over a standing army. And they viewed them as a safer alternative for national defense, right? And the Second Amendment and the militia clauses, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15 through 16, reflects this preference. And the 2-year Army funding limit complemented these provisions by limiting the federal Army's permanency. Okay, so for you guys who keep trying to tell me, oh no, there's no difference, there's only the Army's not limited to 2 years. Yes, it is. It has to be refunded. And it can be eliminated as well. So, and we do have the state militias, or you're automatically a member of the militia if you're a real American. All right, so evolution in practice is a little bit different though. So the Constitution specifies a 2-year limit on Army appropriations. This restriction has not been strictly enforced in modern times, and that's why a lot of you guys are confused. Since the 19th century, Congress has funded the Army and all military branches through this National Appropriations Bill process, such as the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, and the Department of Defense Appropriations Act. The 2-year limit is largely a historical relic in practice, right? Until we return to a constitutional republic, it will remain that way. And the annual budget cycles are now applied to the Navy as well. But again, the Constitution says that the Navy's permanent and the Army's not. That's what you have to look at. It can only be permanent if it's refunded. And that is, our founders and the anti-federalists wanted that for a reason. But unfortunately, the Federalists, with the creation of the Jekyll Island abomination that we call the Fed, that has become the centralized control has become stronger and stronger. Now, the 2-year limit was significant because it ensured the Army's existence and funding depended on regular congressional approval and reinforced the principle that the military serves the people through their elected representatives. It was designed to prevent tyranny. And so, and also to make sure we had civilian control. So give me a bunch of ones if you understand so far. Now, contrasting that with the Navy, yeah, I would agree with you, A-Arma, probably did. Now, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 13 grants Congress the power to provide and maintain a Navy without a similar 2-year funding restriction, okay? So again, and that reflects, obviously, we talked about this, the geographic and strategic considerations of having a Navy, lower domestic threat, and the historical precedent. So that pretty much covers that. And then, of course, they wanted to make sure the Army couldn't consolidate power or suppress dissent, right? We didn't want to have dissent to be able to be suppressed because America is a nation born in rebellion. So, and this was a concern rooted in British abuses during the colonial era. So it was basically a compromise between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists to balance security and liberty. So that's pretty much it, guys. Do you guys have any questions before I get on the road for Chow? Arr! Let me just take a look here. And that is true, F. That, yeah, so F does point out the people who were opposed to the creation of a central bank died in the sinking of the Titanic. Well, Nathan Ezra, I don't even know that we want to be a global superpower. I don't think that's what our founders wanted. I mean, do you? Do you think we need to be a global superpower? I think that's a reason why a lot of people hate us. I'm not sure. No, Jack, I'm not a SEAL. But I have a lot of respect for SEALs, and I have several friends who are former U.S. Navy SEALs. One of them, my buddy Howard, was the vice president of the Leathernecks Motorcycle Club, because Marines have so much respect for corpsmen that we consider them to be Marines, and corpsmen are our medics. And he became a Navy SEAL after he served as a combat corpsman with us Marines. Similar to Chief Eddie Gallagher. Chief Eddie Gallagher, before he became a Marine, was also a Navy corpsman. I mean, strike that, before he became a SEAL, was a Navy corpsman. And I believe he is the first U.S. Navy sailor as a corpsman who went through Marine Corps State Platoon training as a sniper. And so I got a lot of respect. Yes, for Chief Gallagher. Now, Jack does ask me, and I think I said this earlier, isn't the Marine Corps a branch of the Navy? Absolutely. It's the men's branch. It's the men's department. That's true. Oh, BZ Watchdog made it back. And BZ Watchdog says, I didn't even make it out of training, which is not true. So you can go fuck yourself, BZ. But the Navy definitely is basically the people who get us to the battle. And life under the microscope, hey now. So does anybody have any questions about the Constitution or the 2-year requirement for the Army to be basically reauthorized in order for our standing Army to exist? Anybody? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start I'm going to go ahead and hump it back to the freaking bivouac area. And, oh God, this thing's heavy. Now, normally I'm carrying a 45-pound plate in this bad chicken, but because I'm still recovering from my sciatica, I'm going to go ahead and just do the 25er for now. So I'm going to go ahead and try to hump it back. But do you guys have any questions for me about anything while I'm walking back to my fob? Now, Riley Murphy says, is the Army we have now practically a standing Army? No, I would agree that it is. I think it's a problem. And I think that if you look at my shorts that I did the other day about Washington's farewell address, and faux patriots, you'll be able to see what George Washington felt about this. I think that that having a standing Army and getting involved in foreign conflicts and foreign interventions has placed this country at great risk. And with Sleepy Joe opening our southern border for the last 4 years for purposes of helping his party redistrict the entire country blue using the U.S. Census, we're going to have major fallout. We know that at least 50,000 Chinese communist military-age males made it across. We know that all Chinese citizens are automatically members of the Chinese Communist Party, and they're automatically employees of the Communist Party spy apparatus. So why we let them in, I have no idea, other than to try and redistrict everything blue. But if we don't have a country left, it's not going to help their party that much. And so what you're going to see is, with Israel attacking Iran, we don't know how many Iranians and sleeper cells made it across during the last 4 years. But my big fear is that they brought in weapons of mass destruction and that there are sleeper cells all over the United States now. And that we're looking at some serious problems. And they hate our guts. Their stated goal is the destruction, death to America, right? Death to America is their stated goal. So by us being involved in these foreign entanglements and supporting the state of Israel like we have, and things of that nature, and having a foreign-controlled banking system, I think that we're in a lot of trouble, guys. And so in one of my other videos that I did about 3 or 4 days ago, I mentioned to you that you need to have an escape plan, that you need to be investing in gold and silver, and as many bullets as you can get your hands on, to be prepared just in case. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm not one of these people who's going to be like a tinfoil hatter and try to make you guys get crazy. But use common sense. Use common sense. The Iranians hate the Israelis, and they know that we're the ones who provide them all their military equipment. They know, their Muslim government, their Islamic government knows that the CIA put Mohammad Reza Pahlavi in power, their Shah, and that he was a brute. He was brutal to his population, and that's how the Muslims were able to take control and make it into an Islamic republic, which oppresses women and things like that. And if we had stayed away from those foreign entanglements, we would not be at this risk that we're at today. Give me a bunch of ones if you agree. I think that's a real problem. Well, NBA lost tapes, I would say probably because Probably because their banks control our Federal Reserve System. I would say that's why they're so important. I don't know, what do you guys think? I mean, come on, Kuhn Loeb, give me a break. Foreign banks control our Federal Reserve System. You know that our government has no control over the Federal Reserve, or limited control, based upon the fact that our own executive leader, the president, can't fire the head of the Federal Reserve. I mean, how stupid is that? That the guy that we elect president of the United States cannot fire this guy who runs the Federal Reserve Bank. In any event, you see that our currency system is weakening, that the communist Chinese, as well as other countries that don't like us because of our foreign interventions, are creating a gold-based system, a gold and silver-based system called BRICS, which is what our government is supposed to be based upon. Our currency is only supposed to be based on silver and gold, not fiat currency. Under the Federal Reserve System, our Federal Reserve creates money out of nothing. It's not money, it's fiat currency. It's backed by nothing except the promise of a bunch of lying politicians who are paid off by these same bankers. So, what's happening, I believe, is that the reason why we're going to end up going to war with Iran and probably communist China is because these particular individuals, who I'm not going to name because I'll probably get my YouTube channel banned, need the United States to engage in a third world war to protect their control over the currency, to make sure that the United States Federal Reserve note remains the world's reserve currency. Mark my words that the CIA and the Mossad are not going to allow China and other countries like Iran to institute the BRICS currency system. And that is probably why we're testing weapons in Ukraine right now against another BRICS nation, Russia. And so, to answer your question, I don't think that we need a standing army. I don't think that we need to be involved in all these foreign entanglements. I think we need to go back to a tariff-based system, in that what you make, your earnings are yours, and that the government has no business knowing how much you make, how much you earn, that accountants and all these people who are making money off of this corrupt system should find other jobs. We should not have to file taxes every year and go through all this nonsense. I mean, I've got to spend, like a couple of months just to do my taxes. It's ridiculous. It takes away from productivity. And then we just give it to illegal aliens who snuck across our border, give them free healthcare and free everything in exchange for redistricting everything so another political party can maintain power. That's insane to me. So what do you guys think? Let me see if we got anybody else who wants to ask me any questions. Can you give my friend... Oh, okay. You guys are something else. Well, Rohin Baroga, I guess you don't understand. When you have a law firm or you have a medical practice with a lot of employees, that doing accounting and doing taxes takes several months. And I don't mean by just sitting in front of a computer and waiting till the end of the year. When you look at the loss of productivity that each day that you have to do, it's probably 60 days out of your productivity. And it's also statistically proven that that's about how long it takes for someone, even with a small business. So it's not just me saying that, it's based on statistics, that that's about how long it takes, not including your sweat equity that you had to put in to being able to afford to pay an accountant to do all this work, once you put all the documents together for them. So compliance with government regulations and the Federal Reserve tax scheme easily takes 60 days of your time. Yeah, if you're a typical clock puncher, it's not going to take you that long. But if you're somebody who's an entrepreneur, they're the ones who get punished under this system. And it takes an enormous amount of your productivity. The cost of compliance and hours and money, even though it's not money, it's fiat currency, is absolutely insane. Give me a bunch of ones, if you guys agree, who have businesses and who have gone bankrupt, right? They always tax you on your productivity, but they don't give you a tax refund if things don't work out, which is crazy, right? I mean, why can't it work both ways? They only come after you when you're successful, which is why many people believe that the current tax system that we have is a form of punishment of success. And of course, the income tax system is communistic in nature. It goes after successful people and redistributes that wealth to other people who are less successful, and they're obviously going to vote for the political party who gives them subsidies and government benefits. And so that is another problem they have with that system. So what do you guys think? I want to know what your opinion is. And let's see here. Woo. So guys, imagine how it was when I was carrying a 45-pound plate. And these roads, if you can see the road here, I don't know if you can see the angle, but that's about a 15% grade. So this is a major ass kicker for me. Whew. Holy crap, I'm running out of energy here. Need to get home and get some protein in my body. All right, so does anybody else have any questions for me about the differences between the Army and the Navy and the appropriations and the constitutional prohibition against a standing army for longer than a period of 2 years unless it's reauthorized? Anybody? Now, I'm taking my son to judo, but I will try and cover some of the parade. Hopefully you guys are watching the parade today. It's going to be pretty awesome. Celebrating the Army's birthday. All right, let's see here. Got an Air Force vet in here. That's pretty cool. Well, I appreciate you Air Force guys. I know you guys transport the Army, and one of my friends who was an Anglico told me that he would use their version of a forward air controller. He said that you guys would come in with those gunships and just light people up, and when he was in Helmand. So a lot of respect for you guys. We always joke around, you know, about Air Force because they don't have the same discipline as Marines. But I think most of you guys know that the Marines eat their own, and that's why a lot of guys in the Corps end up going and making lateral moves into the Army or another branch that's less disciplined because they don't like it that they can't make rank and stuff like that. The only way you really make rank in the Marine Corps is if there's a war, unfortunately. So, and although I didn't get to serve in combat, which is what, obviously the Marine Corps is a combat-oriented organization, I've stayed active since I was disabled from the Corps. And I give speeches at the Wounded Warriors Battalion in Camp Pendleton and try to help disabled vets get work. I'll walk over 20 or 30 college grads to hire a Marine, even if he was a grunt, because they make better employees and they're highly disciplined and they just get it done. No excuses. They make it happen for the most part. And most of them, the vast majority of them, are really big into physical fitness, and being fat and obese is a sign of laziness, and they know that. And so people who are in shape typically get up early, they're squared away, and they show that they have discipline. And so something that's very, very important also as part of your lifestyle. And that's why you guys, I did this lawyer workout video for you today to motivate you guys, even guys who are inactive Marines, who sort of became civilianized. I try to encourage you, me with all my injuries, years of judo and Muay Thai, and all the stuff that I've been through, you don't see me making up excuses. Get up early, try to do a workout, and try to eat right. Of course, no excuse again, guys. I have gained a bunch of weight since I got sciatica, but I'm working my way through it, trying to get squared away. And by doing this, I think that within the next few weeks, I'll be down to about 185, but I still am incredibly strong. I just can't do squats anymore or deadlifts, but I can still push 350 on the bench for 1 or 2 reps with a spotter, and I can still crank out 305 for 5 or 6 reps, which is pretty damn good for an old guy. So I'm proud of myself for that. How many of you guys can say that you're doing this? Well, I want all of you to say that without excuses, because if you're going to be part of Team MPE, you have to be ready for war at all times. Hoorah! All right, so let me see if I got any other questions here. Thanks, Sweet and Low 78. That's right. Life Under says carbs and sugar is addiction. Life Under's got me on that carnivore diet, which I fell off a little, I'm going to admit. My wife's Salvadorian, so I've been eating plátanos and all that shit. Horrible. Comfort food, right? Craving that sugar high. Depression from not being able to train. But I'm back at it, guys. So, any questions for me? Any questions for me, guys? Hold on. Oh, man. I'm still live. All right, hold on. All right, so hopefully you guys enjoyed my show today. Woo! Man, that was an ass kicker. All right, so I'm just going to go through and look at the comments. So it's about 105 out there, man. It feels like it anyways. Let's see here. Why is the National Guard, why isn't the National, 10-time shooters ask, why isn't the National Guard controlled by their respective state without a federal government? Well, the National Guard is supposed to be under the control of the governor of the state. The problem with the National Guard is that it can be federalized if the state doesn't act. So it really is subservient ultimately to the executive powers of the central government. Whereas the irregular militia is an irregular militia, where it's all of us. And that's been the history of it. So the regulars could be federalized, which would be similar to the National Guard, but it's not, it's different. And the irregulars, like you and I and every freeborn American, male, 16 and older, is irregular militia. And that's what we want to focus on. And Roland Baroga, I know you might think that I'm out of shape, but I'm 55, and I'll challenge you to a push-up contest or bench press contest any day of the week. And I just went on about a 2-mile walk this morning with a 25-pound plate in my backpack. So when you say out of shape, what you mean is I have high body fat, and I agree with that, and it's embarrassing. But I'm going to square myself away. And then F, yeah, the Wounded Warriors Battalion is at Camp Pendleton, and one of my friends who is a retired Master Gunnery Sergeant invites me there to speak sometimes, and I try to help these EAS Marines get jobs. And I've had a couple of them on the Law Office Study Program. One of them decided I'm done and just took off to Bali, and he's having babies over there, living life. He's permanently disabled, so what are you going to do? You know, people got to do what they got to do. So let me see here. Now, Life Under says that my USAF instructors were all ex-Marines. Well, there's no such thing as an ex-Marine, bro. We're inactive U.S. Marines, or, that's it, because once you're in the Corps, you're always a Marine, and that's just the way we are. That's why I'm so embarrassed about this body fat gain. But I'm not going to sit there and try to hide it. We'll get squared away. That's right. And Riley Murphy, we talked about that already, about why the Navy is not under the same restrictions. It's a constitutional issue, which I talked about. Jody, good seeing you, ma'am. Tom Shaw, thanks again for joining me. Thanks for all the mods too. And I agree with you, F, about, well, most tax is theft. I think that the income tax is an abomination. I mean, it's basically a form of punishment. It punishes successful people. And remember, we're supposed to be a tariff-based economy, and America was most successful, and we were able to build the best roads, the best bridges, and everything with a tariff-based economy. So don't believe anything you hear on the Communist News Network. They're basically a propaganda arm of the Federal Reserve Bank. So let's see here. And I agree about freeing Lane Myers, and we did some shows about that already, Gloria. He's already pled out, unfortunately. Well, behavior bender, we shouldn't even have to file taxes. That's the issue. America is a land of individual rights and property rights, and your earnings are yours. It's your private property. The government should have no business knowing what you make. It's not something they should know about. That's between you and your God and your family. So, yeah, let's get into it. I'm just kind of scrolling up. I agree with everything Scrubzilla says. And then Nathan Ezra, well, you know what, Nathan, you're right about we wouldn't have the sweet oil. You know, we have tons of sweet oil in California, but unfortunately, the commie government in California won't let us build refineries. So we have to import the sweet oil out of California and have it refined somewhere else. So we've got plenty of sweet oil, but guess what else we already have? We have all of Tesla's technology that was stolen out of his safe by the US government. Don't assume for a minute that we don't have the technology right now to power every house in this country using solar or some other kind of nuclear technology, okay? Don't assume for a minute we don't have that technology. It's there, trust me on that. Wireless, the wireless ability to do it. So let's see here. Well, anyways, I'm going to go ahead and close it out, guys. I hope you guys enjoy the parade today. Make sure to tune in and check it out. Support our troops. Remember, most people who join the military join because they want to protect our country, and they think that they're supporting and defending the Constitution. Most people don't realize that they're being lied to, like the Gulf of Tonkin, like the weapons of mass destruction. But you can't hate on them for that because they thought that they were joining, like many law enforcement officers joined, because they thought they could make the world a better place. So as much as I am offended at the leadership, I still love my fellow Marines, and I'll always be there for them, lock, stock, and barrel. With that being said, guys, make sure to like and subscribe. Make sure to save, because we never know when the thought police are going to take down this channel. Semper Fi, do or die. Definitely check out my shows, guys. Memberships are always appreciated. And pick up a copy of my book by going to the description on my channel, My Journey to Becoming a Practicing Attorney with No Law Degree or Undergrad.